Story 1. I was raised in a faith-healing religion. When I was about 8 years old, I got a terrible flu. The faith healer told me that I was not well because my faith was not strong enough. I still believed in Santa Claus. Story 2. I got turned off of religion the same way I got turned off of the tooth fairy. You just realize you do not have the faith that other people have. Story 3. I was not raised religious at all, and you would be surprised how deeply disturbing religious people can seem from the outside. It is downright creepy to see people crying at a bad worship song, reaching up to the sky, watching a Southern Baptist rant about LGBTQ+ people, communists, and evolutionists is more viscerally horrifying to me than nearly anything I have seen in an actual horror movie. The existence of good, decent religious people strikes me as more of a coincidence than anything else. They never made any of it appeal to me. Story 4. I went to seminary to become a doctor of philosophy pastor, where I deeply studied and reflected on the concept of faith and its role in religion and my life. I realized that faith was simply my denial of all tangible evidence in the universe in order to preserve a belief ingrained in every aspect of my life. It was a painful process to dismantle those beliefs. Now I live my life astonished at how truly toxic Christianity can be, and how it has been weaponized into something politically connected that creates despicable people who harm or wish harm on others and lack any empathy. Story 5. I do not want to offend anyone, but to me, the fact that some children are born without a chance, due to many factors, indicates that there is not a kind and loving God. I am not saying there is nothing. I am saying it is not a benevolent force that cares about our lives or judges us. Story 6. I went to Catholic school, and the nuns there were absolutely horrible and racist. Because of this, I started to doubt everything, and it led me to rejecting the whole thing by age 12. Story 7. Too many things to count. My mom is a recovering Catholic. After I took it upon myself to study multiple religions extensively, I was able to appreciate the message, reading between the lines, but felt embarrassed for the followers who took every scripture literally. Not to mention the amount of war, death, and genocide that has occurred in the name of a deity. I did not need to read all those books to figure out how to be a good person. Behaving like a civilized human being is naturally inherent. Frankly, those who claim to live by scripture are not doing a very good job of exercising the intended moral compass. That being said, I would not classify myself as atheist, but rather spiritual and willing, especially since experimenting with psychedelics. Story 8. I am not an atheist because I was raised in a religion and then left. I am an atheist because I was never indoctrinated into a religion, so I never got involved. Story 9. I just outgrew it. My dad was a prison convert, so he tried to introduce us to Jesus. My mom's family is agnostic or atheist. By the time I was 11 or 12, I had lost interest in what my dad was trying to get us to do, and I never looked back. Story 10. Read about religions for homework. Wait a minute. They all say the exact same thing. Is this nonsense? Story 11. I am a trained cultural anthropologist with a minor in religion, raised as a proverbial hard-shell Baptist. The more you study other cultures and their systems of faith, the more you realize it is all unfounded, and the sooner our culture outgrows it, the better off we will be. Story 12. Reading the Bible as a whole does not work unless you only read the parts the pastor wants to talk about and let him provide all the context. Story 13. It is ridiculous. You have an imaginary friend that loves you, but you have to love him back to stop him from having you tortured for eternity. Also, he is okay with war, famine, and disease, but he is very concerned with where you engage in intimate relationships and enjoyed helping Tom Brady win Super Bowls instead of stopping acquired immunodeficiency syndrome. Insane. Story 14. When religious people cannot answer seemingly basic questions, responding with, "because that is what I believe," is not a valid answer for me to consider. It does not help that there is more judgment, negative talk, and bad behavior from people in the church than from those who are not in it. I also see young children born with disease and illness that they did not deserve. That does not seem like the greatest God, if you ask me. Story 15. Religion, any religion, is responsible for more death, war, and human suffering than any other single force on earth. Story 16. I never connected with church or the concept of God. It always seemed false to me. Being ostracized for questioning the word of God feels like being told to ignore the person behind the curtain. Story 17. Christians, I went to Sunday school and had my Bible stolen. People preach the Bible but do not know it at all. Bad people look down on you, thinking they are better than you, condemning you to hell because you listen to evil music. This was like the Dungeons and Dragons satanic panic of the 1980s and 1990s. Story 18. I just don't get it, especially worship. I worked hard to accomplish things. I have worked hard to get where I am. Why am I thanking someone else for my work? I didn't exactly have help, as far as I am aware. Story 19. It built up over time. I was questioning things about religion as a child that grown adults weren't even considering for some reason. Nobody liked the questions I had, and instead of trying to educate me on my curiosity, they just wanted me to be quiet and conform. I learned quickly that religious people hate having their faith questioned, but I couldn't understand why they wouldn't question it. You mean you just fall in line with what this book and preacher say with no way to prove it and you just don't question? I was about 10 years old and I thought that was strange, yet grown people just think that's normal. I got so annoyed with being forced into religion as a kid that the last time I prayed when I was 12, I demanded God give me a sign or I would walk away. No sign, I walked. Best decision of my life. I would be lying if I said I didn't judge those who are religious. I can't fathom how you can exist in this world believing in an immortal old man in the sky who created life with magic after taking all these science classes growing up and magic not being real. It makes sense that primitive human minds made up stories like that to fill in gaps of what they understood about the world around them in olden days. But we're past that. We have all this technology and information at our fingertips. There is literally no need for religion in the world now, so why are we still pretending that fairy tales are real? It's just a coping mechanism for the unfortunate at best, or a weapon of oppression for the fortunate at worst. Just burn it all down. Story 20. I read one science book in 8th grade, just one. That was more than enough. Later in life, hopefully, one realizes that believing in something because you feel it is right, or because you want to believe it, is immature and unwise thinking. I am very suspicious of needy thinking like that. Just because you want something to be true does not mean it is. Both conservatives and progressives need to learn this lesson. Story 21. I find this to be a strange question. It assumes that you are born religious and then fall out of it. I think the opposite question is more appropriate. If you are religious, what made you religious? Was it your family introducing you to their religion, or did you come to it later in life? Story 22. Hearing Bible stories about Noah's Ark and that a pair of each species got into the boat. 7 years old, I thought, wait, what? I was kicked out of catechism shortly after. Story 23. I just couldn't understand believing in something with no evidence. Whenever I achieved anything, it was always God, not me, and I should thank him. Story 24. They tell you to be like Jesus and love everyone while proceeding to hate many groups. Gay people are said to be going to hell. Jewish people are blamed for killing Jesus and said to be going to hell. Women are treated as the property of men. Poor people are told they do not live godly enough. Black people are told that God wants their suffering. Gun victims are seen as God's will. Teenagers are called heathens. Prisoners are labeled atheists, which is not true. Rapists are called atheists, which is not true. Thieves are called atheists, which is not true. Jehovah's Witnesses are called weirdos going to hell. Catholics are accused of following the wrong testament and described as hellbound. Muslims are called liars and described as hellbound. Liberals are called witches and demons in disguise. Democrats are described as wolves in sheep's clothing. Republicans are labeled killers for hire. Pastors who cheat on their wives and are caught with children are considered untrustworthy. Story 25. Atheism is the default state. You have to be taught religion to believe it. I was not taught it. I tried for 20 years to believe it and never could. Nothing drew me to atheism. It is just that every other choice was absurd. Story 26. I was raised Christian until one night I had an epiphany. Why should I believe this over any other religion? I had a mental breakdown, questioning what really proves that this is the right belief, that this is the correct deity controlling everything, compared to all the other religions that also claimed to have the answer. Then I realized there was no more proof than they had, and there really is no proof of any of this. Additionally, I never felt the things religious people say I should have. The church was generally a comfortable place. I never felt scared or oppressed, but I also didn't feel the touch of God, as they say. I never felt his presence in my heart or experienced him touching my life in any meaningful way. I never saw anything happen that I could consider a response to my prayers. I have never felt God, and if he is still there, he certainly stopped contacting me long ago. Story 27. I never believed it. I like the stories and narratives on the human condition, but the ontological claims are indistinguishable from any other mythology. Story 28. I found it was more about control and being in the group than it was about faith. I have felt more connected being on a trail in the forest than I ever did in any church. Story 29. There is a lot of pain and suffering experienced by innocent people in the world. If God exists, he must be aware of this. If that is true, then one of two things must be true. He is aware of the suffering but cannot do anything to stop it, or he is aware of the suffering and chooses to do nothing about it. Therefore, he is either irresponsible, powerless, or cruel. I am not interested in worshiping anything with those qualities. Additionally, there is no evidence supporting the existence of God. Furthermore, there have been serious scandals within the Catholic Church involving abuse. Story 30. The casual indoctrination in school. In state primary schools in the United Kingdom, at least when I was in primary school, we sang hymns, psalms of praise, and repeated prayers. At first, I did not think anything of it because it was what we had always done since I started at the age of 5. However, as I got a little older and began to think about this God figure and understood the words in the songs and prayers, I started to question things. I asked a couple of teachers, but aside from one or two, none of them were religious. I asked my parents, but they were not religious either. I started applying the critical thinking skills of a 10-year-old and realized that it did not make sense. There was no proof, and it was actually all nonsense. It put me off religion for a long time before I discovered spirituality and other non-mainstream religions and practices. Story 31. I grew up in a Christian household, and basically the religion in a nutshell, as I understood it, was be kind to your neighbor, don't steal, don't murder, practice forgiveness, humility, and compassion. I don't need religion or Christianity for that. You can be that person without religion very easily. I don't need a Santa Claus do this, or you'll be sorry because I'm always watching type practice in my life. That's not healthy. Do good things for people because it's the right thing to do. Don't do it because you get a reward at the end. Story 32. 1. It never really made sense. 2. The Bible was written by humans, so at the very least, there is interpretation. 3. The experiences are not widespread. For example, if angels did speak, why did they only choose about 3 people to talk to? 4. There has been a lot of killing based on religion, which is ironic. I think religion could explain why we are here, such as why the Big Bang happened or why physics and life are built the way they are. However, I do not think the heavens have ever intervened. I believe religion consists of extremely clever stories that try to teach life lessons and establish good ground rules. Essentially, some people got tired of a difficult world, so they created rules to improve life and stories about how to cope when life is challenging. However, for the rules to be followed, an authoritative figure such as God is needed. People can also misuse religion for bad deeds. Overall, the intent of religion is good, but it has flaws. Story 33. For me, it built up over time, especially as I entered my teenage years. I lived with my grandparents who went to the Pentecostal church, and they forced it onto me. I completely stopped attending church sometime after my grandmother forced me to get baptized. Everyone thought it was my choice, but I did not know until the last minute. Story 34. I wasn't raised with religion. My mother told me that if I chose a religion, I should not be a hypocrite about it. However, all I saw were religious people being hypocritical, so I concluded that it is not possible to be religious without being hypocritical. Story 35. The corruption and abuse of children. Out of more than 10,000 religions, people think theirs is right. Many horrible things have been done in the name of religion. Such a needy God that wants everyone to worship constantly. Giving children brain cancer but claiming it is God's will. Religion is one of the biggest businesses in the world. Religious people often believe they are better and more righteous because they believe in a higher power. Story 36. Being sexually assaulted by multiple people within the church and my partner at the time, and it being turned around on me when I tried to seek guidance in prayer. They also believed it is a wife's job to keep her husband happy and that denying him sex is going against God and not performing her duties. Among other things, I immediately began to distance myself and found my way out. This was a non-denominational, we're cool Christians type church. It made me realize all of it was actual nonsense. Story 37. The question should not be what turned me off from religion. If I was never raised religious in the first place, then that is the default, isn't it? The more relevant question is why religion never managed to draw me in. I used to feel guilty for not believing in God when it seemed to be the norm around me, so I tried for a while in my childhood to pray and communicate with God. I never felt anything. It just required a lot of faith and trust that I simply did not have, similar to how I never believed in Santa Claus. Also, the logic of religion never made sense to me. If God is to be feared and obeyed in all these ways, then he seems like a vengeful egomaniac. So why should I beg for his approval and forgiveness? And if everything is God's plan, then why does God plan for so many innocent children to suffer and for evil people to thrive? People who trust that this is the world God wants are people I frankly do not feel safe around. All that, combined with the judgmental and hypocritical standards exhibited by my strongly religious peers, made it so I never felt the urge to convert. Story 38. I was 5 years old and thought it was strange that people were praying to God after my cousin drowned. If prayers worked, he would never have drowned in the first place. If God was benevolent, my cousin would be alive. So either God is unkind or he does not exist. Story 39. I was Muslim until I realized miracles are not real and unrealistic. I do not want to mention the inappropriate activities of the Prophet. It is meant to look good even after thousands of years, but it can clearly be described as inappropriate. Religious people push you to believe their religion as well. No religion shows respect to someone with a different belief. Story 40. The whole statement, you believe in one of the 3,000 current gods. I believe in none. And also, you believe in your God with no proof beyond faith, but deny all the others? Story 41. I grew up in Ireland in the 1980s when it was still a de facto Catholic theocracy, so most of my complaints about religion are specifically about Catholicism, even though much of it generalizes to others. Step 1 was church sure is boring. Step 2, around age 8 or 9, was oh wait, also none of this makes sense. Maybe I'll understand it later. Step 2A, maybe 10 or 11, was hey, this Muslim kid doesn't have to go to church with the rest of the class. That sounds amazing. Why can't I be a Muslim? Step 3, early teens, was actually this is making less sense the more I learn about it, mixed with the beginnings of also they want to prohibit a bunch of stuff I think is okay. Step 4, upon arrival in secondary school, was church is no longer mandatory, so I'm no longer going, with a side note of turns out Islam is not required for this step. Step 5, mid-teens, was clearly Catholicism is false and its moral teachings are false, and the church wants me to be miserable, but how about some kind of generalized polytheism like in Discworld and the Sandman where gods exist and have power to the degree that people believe in them? Step 6, almost immediately following Step 5, was things existing based on whether we believe in them or not is a bit silly, and my Step 5 view is atheism with wishful thinking on top, so I'll just take out the wishful thinking. Step 7, around the same time, was when church sexual abuse became public knowledge. So now there was also the church is made of monsters. How dare those people tell anyone how to live their lives? At this time, the mid-1990s, I became approximately as insufferable as the worst online atheist user. Step 8, late teens, was when friends of my family came forward with their abuse stories. Horrific experiences. One man went to a Christian Brothers school where he was not only raped and beaten arbitrarily, but they also burned him with cigarettes just for the fun of hearing his screams. 30 years later, I am still burning with rage about that. Also, I saw the documentary Sex in a Cold Climate when it first aired. This is the documentary that the Magdalene sisters was based on. I am still burning with rage about that as well. Step 9, early 20s, was when I read The New Atheists and got a math degree, and my philosophical ideas became much firmer and more thought out. Step 10, now in my 40s, is a slow and incomplete process of mellowing. I am trying to be less judgmental about people who say they are Catholics without being sufficiently ashamed of it, with mixed success. My biggest area of improvement is that I now only sometimes go on a half-hour rant about abuse whenever the subject of the church comes up in conversation. Story 42. I was baptized at 11 in a thin white gown. Everyone in church could see my developing breasts and pubic region. I was basically naked. If a priest can normalize an audience of 200 people looking at naked children, this religion is abusive. At that moment, I realized religion only hurts children and women. To this day, I cannot think of any religion that helps women or children besides maybe medical hospitals. I was 11 years old, standing horrified as 200 normal people watched many naked children in that church. I was traumatized when I was baptized. Story 43. I do not know if I will ever be completely atheist. What I do know is that I am completely against religions and the church as institutions of power. I have seen various religions increasingly as organized forms of power, manipulation, and control of the masses. I was brought up as a Catholic and recognize that hypocrisy is often present today and around me. My child had to be baptized. Otherwise, I would have problems in the family. At funerals and similar events, I still have to participate in Catholic rites. The truth is that I do not believe religions are a good thing, but if everyone wants to believe what they want and they do not bother me, I am fine with that. For me, that overrides the question of whether or not there is a deity, be it Jehovah, Zeus, Shiva, Allah, Pokemon, or anything else. Story 44. I have never been interested in religion, but I believed in a God until I watched an episode of the science television program in 2007. It talked about some kids from the University of Chicago in the 1920s who recreated the primordial soup and then exposed it to electricity, simulating the massive electrical storms at the time. As a result, they created life. That had been the last thing holding me to deism, going from no life to life. And that was it. Becoming an atheist was the loneliest time of my life, but I couldn't unknow what I knew. Story 45. The most pious and beautiful man I ever knew suddenly got colon cancer and died a painful and unjust death. Being told this was all God's plan and that he wanted his servant back at his side broke me. There is no way a kind, caring God would do that while evil people live forever. From that day on, I stopped believing, and if I am wrong, I will tell God to his face that he is unfair. Story 46. The only difference between a cult and a religion is that the founding member of the religion is deceased. Story 47. Growing up Sunni Muslim all my life, I had been told how evil, degenerate, and pedophilic gay people were, and I believed this. Then, a queer rights activist who was also gay came to my school to talk to our class about homosexuality in general. I was immediately struck by how normal and human he was, not at all like what I was told. I started thinking, if they lied about that, what else was lied about? It was not just that singular moment, but it certainly started my questioning. I began to question practices and scripture more and more until I no longer believed. I am straight, but in summary, homophobia. Story 48. I hate the idea that someone else's made-up rules, which cannot change and are 2 millennia out of date, must apply to me. There are experiences, pleasures, and relationships that must be denied to me because of bigotry from thousands of years ago. I have no problem with spirituality, which I define as an individual's relationship with the unseen forces and interactions of the universe. However, when it is formed into a method of controlling the masses and generating profit because one person claims a personal relationship with a deity and knows the truth, then they can take a hike. Story 49. I am an atheist who started a church. I was born an atheist. When I was 43, I got a kayak. Being on the water feels holy to me, so I started a group called the Church of the Double-Bladed Paddle. It now has 33,000 members. It is a disorganized religion, only reverent about the wet. Story 50. I remember reading Noah's Ark as a child in a picture book and thinking, people think this is real? I was reading Dr. Seuss at the time too and thinking, and people don't think this one is real? It seemed unbelievable from a young age. With the way my religious side of the family preaches forgiveness because they are the ones causing harm, it makes it harder to support. Why should I always forgive people who treat me poorly? It makes no sense. Also, the threats of not following the rules or burning in the fiery pits of hell always felt like fear-mongering control tactics to me. When people use the Bible as a self-help book and not as a way to tear others down, I do not see it as harmful. But more often than not, I continue to see how harmful religion can be, especially when people want to take away others' rights. Not everyone should follow your religious rules or make your religious rules law when not everyone believes in the same things, and the Constitution specifically states freedom of religion. Christianity is not the national religion. There cannot be a national religion if there is freedom of religion. Story 51. My best friend at church became pregnant at 15. They basically expelled her instead of helping her. I have not attended church much since then, but she and I have been friends for 40 years. Story 52. Logic. An all-knowing, all-powerful creator God is self-contradictory. Problem of evil. Even if there were a God, it is not worth worshipping because it endorsed slavery and created childhood bone cancer. The world would be a better place without childhood bone cancer. No all-powerful, all-knowing, all-good God would create a universe with childhood bone cancer. If you assume God made the best universe possible, there are a lot of things in the universe that are very unexpected. Childhood bone cancer, earthquakes, and the biological capacity to commit rape. The universe would be better if releasing mutual pheromones were required for intercourse. There are many ways to create a better universe. Earthquakes, childhood bone cancer, and rape are just a few unexpected things in a perfect world created by a perfect creator. Premise 1. Time is the progression of events, that is, changes in state of being. Premise 2. God is outside of time, atemporal. Premise 3. A change in state, such as deciding to create the universe, requires time, a progression of events. Premise 4. Therefore, if God created time, he must have undergone a change from not creating to creating, which would require time. Conclusion. Thus, God cannot be both the creator of time and outside of time. Story 53. I was born an atheist, and so is everyone else. Religious organizations, regardless of their intent, become instruments of behavioral control in ways I find unacceptable. However, this is not related to atheism. It is related to religion, which is a different matter. The concept of gods adds nothing to the understanding of the universe. It simply delays the unknown by one level. It is a placeholder for an explanation, unnecessary and never truly explanatory. It is too easily used as a justification for hatred. Story 54. I used to be kind of religious when I was a kid. I am visually impaired. When I see comments like, God gave you bad eyes, so you could do amazing things, and we're all made in the image of God, it annoys me. We are not all Stephen Hawking. He was the exception to this rule. If we are made in his image, why do we have degenerative diseases? Why are we born with disabilities? All I ever got was, that's just how he is. Nonsense. I stopped going to church and don't believe in religion at all. Do I care that people practice? No, you do what makes you happy. Will I judge your actions? Yes. Religious or not, if you're a nice person and respectful toward others, we can absolutely be civil and friendly. Just keep it to yourself. If you're pushy in any way and don't take no for an answer, we can no longer be friends. Story 55. I went to a teen girls' night at my friend's church, which turned out to be led by a male youth pastor. It was a 2-hour lecture on the temptation of women and how it was our responsibility not to make ourselves tempting to teenage boys. The burden of responsibility rested entirely on our shoulders. He said God wanted women to be subservient to their husbands, premarital sex was a huge sin, and rape did not exist. It was a woman not doing her job to be untempting. It was really gross, and I remember thinking the whole time how much of it sounded like complete nonsense. After that night, I started developing the opinion, well, If this is total nonsense, is all of it just people trying to control other people? That question led me to figure out spirituality on my own. I do not have a religion, but I am very interested in the way humans connect to meaning, ideas, and structure. I feel comfortable with a personal interpretation of magic, meaning, and purpose that has nothing to do with a deity. I think it can be helpful to have something akin to a religion or moral structure to frame your existence, but none of the established ones are for me. I kind of pick and choose what makes sense to me and live by that. Story 56. Religious followers. Most of them seemed deeply unethical or downright evil to me. It was almost as if their religion was powerless to influence their behavior and was only annoyingly preached, not practiced. Story 57. Nothing turned me off. I just never was into it. I was baptized as a baby and forced by my mother to have a first communion, but I was always an atheist. Story 58. I went to Catholic school and the principal stole from the charity drives we attended. There was also general toxic behavior from the adults around us. Story 59. Growing up in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, I rejected it as soon as my brain developed enough to realize it was not true. I stopped attending when I turned 18. I never fully quit because I was told that if you start the formal process to leave, they will not allow it and will instead excommunicate you, which carries a stigma of pedophile abuse or worse. Story 60. It was the culmination of analyzing what we know to be true and comparing it to what we are told to believe. When the two conflict, it brings everything else into question. In the end, it makes more sense to trust what we know than to rely on blind faith. Story 61. I never really believed. When I was a kid, my parents told me about God and heaven, and I accepted it as true because I generally believed what grown-ups said. However, I never felt any spiritual connection. By the time I was a teenager, I came to the conclusion that I did not believe any of it. Story 62. My brain made me realize it is all nonsense somewhere during primary school age. No Christian atrocities or abuse were needed for it. Simply the realization that it does not make sense was enough. Story 63. The worst people I have met have been excessively religious individuals. It seems strange how they could be so awful and yet quote so much biblical material. Story 64. I was raised Catholic but had access to books and television. I became angry early on. It does not help when your question is answered with God's plan and similar vague explanations. Story 65. Disclaimer. I am going to criticize Christians in America, including Catholics. I am tired of asking questions based on known facts only to be told that faith says otherwise and these topics cannot be discussed. I have been unable to talk about evolution, the allegorical nature of the Bible, or dinosaurs. Many simply ignore these issues. There is no conversation or critical thinking. If you are an evangelical Christian in America, shame on you and your beliefs. They are filled with falsehoods, hypocrisy, hatred, and xenophobia. Your religion divides and marginalizes people. Catholics, your entire institution, from the highest levels, conspired to hide crimes and attack victims of sexual abuse. It is literally one of the world's largest networks of abuse. Your actions are reprehensible. Story 66. As far back as I can remember, I had my doubts. It just did not make sense to me, and I could not blindly believe in something I could never see. The final straw came with this saying, sometimes, the answer to your prayers is no. The problem here is that God's answer to every prayer I have ever had was no. I do not want to hear that. If I am going to devote my entire life to you, worship you as a God without question, and live my life the way you ordered me to, no is the last word I want to hear from you. Story 67. My personal interactions with negative evangelical Christians made me think more critically about the religion I had been influenced by. From there, deeper questioning did not really hold up to inquiry. Story 68. It became clear to me that religion is a means of social control and not aligned with reality. Story 69. I was raised Christian, but my heart was never truly in it. I went through the motions because it was required of me, and the threat of hell was always looming. I studied science in college and met many new people with different viewpoints. I learned a lot more about the universe, Earth, and religion. During that time, many terrible things happened in the world. I concluded that religion is a tool to keep people in line. There is no God, and if there is, he allows horrible things to happen to innocent people. Emotional manipulation and human rights violations by followers are also major concerns and further evidence that religion is a social tool, not real. Either way, I want nothing to do with it. Story 70. I was about 5 years old, at my first Christmas in school. There was a full Christian nativity play planned, and the whole event made me uncomfortable. I asked my grandfather, who was a minister, about it. He patiently explained religion and faith in terms a small child could understand. I decided it was not for me. My grandfather told my father that I was not interested, and my father informed the school that I was not to be involved. The school had no issue with that. I have maintained an atheist stance ever since. Story 71. The hatred and hypocrisy of men. People use the Bible to steal from their brothers and sisters. They talk about God, the Bible, heaven, and hell, and the next minute they are killing their brothers and sisters. How can you tell me that God created us equal, but believe that someone who does not look like you is inferior? We have many different races on this earth, black, white, brown, and Asian, but allegedly your so-called God is white. Please tell me why. Story 72. The church community includes some of the most twisted, judgmental, and hateful individuals I have ever encountered. Story 73. I went to a Christian elementary school and it was very difficult. Teachers did not care about the kids being bullied because the bully's father donated a large amount of money to the school. As I grew older, I kept seeing the same thing happen. Christians enabling the worst people while acting morally superior. I guess the turning point was looking back at the teachings of Christ for a class I took and seeing all the social ideas Jesus supports. I realized that some Christians do not truly follow their religion. They just cherry-pick teachings to excuse bad behavior. Jesus is admirable, though. Unfortunately, some view him as very progressive. Story 74. It's complicated. I grew up with two warring parents, one of whom claimed faith in Jesus Christ and essentially fought my atheist mother, making her take me to church every Sunday. I was difficult, and the only question I had even then was, why should I believe this? Otherwise, the teachings about being nice to people and honest were fine. They were the passionate, sincerely held beliefs of someone who was never a parent, only a bully, and I would be lying if I said that did not influence me. I just never believed in Christianity. I still role-played for 10 years, but from observing people, I noticed a total absence of transformation in churchgoers' lives, and a lot of the advice I inferred from the Bible just accelerated my bullying. When this bullying increased and the major cracks in my parents' marriage began to flare up during my teens, I prayed fervently. Unless the response was really subtle, nothing happened. I really do not mind if you believe, but I ask people to leave me out of it. I cannot tolerate it any longer. To be fair, though, I think my fellow atheists are rather harsh toward believers. Story 75. Mostly it was learning the history of Yahweh, that he was originally part of a pantheon and that his original worshippers were polytheistic. Yahweh adopted characteristics from other Canaanite deities just as modern Christianity adopted Christmas. It is history, culture, and adoption all the way down. Story 76. I was raised in a strange house of neoconservative nurses who believed in spiritual good and evil, and, as white Americans, chose Christianity as the embodiment of their spirituality. As nurses, they placed great importance on critical thinking and science. Over time, life experience and education led science to prevail. Story 77. The lies and the greed. Over the centuries, religion has been the biggest reason for conflict. God does not exist. Propaganda and manipulation of others. Story 78. I was raised in a very religious family and area. Everyone in my neighborhood and school was part of the same religion. I started asking questions when I was just a kid, but no one could give me rational answers. It was not hard to figure out that it was all just nonsense. Story 79. Parents did not raise me religiously. They had both been raised Christian, one Roman Catholic and one Calvinist, but did not impart it on to me or my siblings because they both believed we should be able to choose for ourselves. I grew up not believing in God, and nothing really made me change. Story 80. I got baptized at 12, looked around the church, and thought, wow, this is very strange. I never went back voluntarily. Story 81. It was a realization that I was no longer convinced by the claims made by religious people. In my case, it was very frightening because I was raised very religiously, and my doubts made me feel like I was going to burn in hell for eternity. Once I was able to let go of that fear, I have been much happier without religion. Story 82. When my Southern Baptist grandmother started denying reality, the political movement associated with Donald Trump gained momentum, and now I am essentially anti-theist. I reject religion. Story 83. I'm a Christian, but I started out as an atheist. Many religious people can be very harsh and rude. I have learned that religion and the Bible are man-made, but God is not. The Bible was written by humans, reflecting what they believed God was saying. That's just my opinion. Most Christians believe that any other religion is demonic and that gay people are going to hell. Honestly, that's insane. I'm a non-binary lesbian, and I have full faith that there is a God. He made us perfectly in his image. Story 84. Not really atheist, more agnostic. Both my parents have different religions, and they respect each other's beliefs. They would both explain their religions to me but never forced me to join. They believe that if we are meant to find religion, that is our own path, and they do not get to make that decision for us. My parents encourage us to be curious, and I did. I read a lot about different religions from various cultures. I think religion, at its core, is beautiful and full of lore and valuable lessons. However, religion nowadays seems to be more of a propaganda tool. It has lost its context and value. Many people I have encountered like to take scriptures out of context or use them to justify their actions. This definitely made the community hard to be around. Even when I was a child, asking questions about religion was always met with anger or condescension, or aggressiveness in trying to make me join. Story 85. I asked why my religion was considered more correct than other religions. Religion does not have a good answer for that. Then I explored the topic more deeply. Story 86. I was forced into Southern Christianity as a child. I always thought it was all Baptist, but it was a First Assembly of God church, and I don't think it's actually Baptist. I can't remember the name of the denomination, though. First, I hated the clothing I had to wear. Dresses, dress shoes, and those uncomfortable dress seams that run across the oddest locations on your body. I didn't understand why I had to be so uncomfortable when we went to church. Then, as soon as I got old enough to really understand what was being said, I didn't actually understand it. I couldn't justify all the evil in the world just because it is someone's will or plan. He doesn't have to be here and suffer, but we do, and it's okay because he created us and knows what's best. I've since come to my own determination that all religion was created as a way to control people, to have consequences for actions, and so no one could question or kill the leader. Maybe it was necessary to get us more civilized. Or maybe some really controlling men just couldn't stand that not everyone wanted to live just like they do, so they decided to force it upon people. Regardless, it is not real, and good people don't need religion to tell them to be good, they just are. I'll bet all the evil people of the world are well versed in religion. Story 87. I was raised atheist. As I grew older, I had some religious beliefs expressed to me by friends, but I found them hard to accept. Story 88. I follow the history and human connection with religion, but I am not religious myself. Some of the worst people do not know the true horror and history of most religions. I like history, but religion and the people involved in it are some of the worst people I have met. Story 89. Whose God is great? The Muslims, the Christians, the Hindus, or any of the rest? They cannot all be right, so why do you believe that what you follow is correct? Story 90. I was raised in a family where my mother frequently attended services on Sundays. My father was mentally absent, so he didn't care much for it. My mother enjoyed having me attend with her. In a way, it was a really nice time. While the adults had their service upstairs, a group of children played in the large basement. Most of them really felt like they were visiting family each Sunday. Despite the close connections we created with each other, I never really connected spiritually. And heaven knows I tried. The whole service was loosely organized for kids, and we attended from time to time. Every time I attended, I saw people around me praying, speaking in tongues, and having a direct line to God. I, however, felt nothing. Nothing at all. Just plain doubt. At first, I was simply naive to it all. It'll come, I said to myself. Just pretend to speak in tongues and say that I feel God. Then, of course, came the true doubt. The attempted help. You just have to pray more. I was filled with shame. How come all these people could be so attuned to God? And I felt nothing. After a while, I stopped joining my mother at these services. As a kid and teenager, I did a lot of stupid things, but I have always been proud of myself for sticking to my beliefs, or rather, the lack of them. I did not believe in any of it. I did not see what the others did, and quite frankly, after a while, I was okay with it. If God had to make me feel ashamed for not feeling the connection, then forget that. That being said, I am not a fan of the constant hypocrisy in that congregation either. They spoke like saints, my mother included, but they were just as flawed as everyone else. Surely they were not all bad, but the pedestal they put themselves on? Forget that. Story 91. Not an atheist, but for the local religion, it was constant exposure to Christians. If these are the people this religion produces, then I do not want to be involved. Story 92. Well, just watching religious people, mainly Christians, the commandments were mistranslated, for rather significantly. Which does not matter much, since most followers are rank hypocrites anyway. The religion itself changes radically over the centuries, showing that it is affected by a sort of religious fashion trending. Many followers consider praying to be taking action, when instead whatever they are praying about just continues to wreak havoc in the face of their inaction. Despite the advice that the wealthy have a much harder time reaching heaven, Christians continue to seek out wealth. Christians seem to love marriage, most totally unaware that it is a pagan custom that the Bible does not define, and recommends against except as a last-ditch outlet for sexual activity. Christians mostly seem to hate and ban polygamy, despite the Bible saying nothing against it, other than the point above. And it seems to count many wives as a blessing to Solomon, for example. Overall, Christianity is just a successful cult, but still a cult. Odds-wise, it is highly unlikely that the real truth would be so easily marketable and so convenient to follow. From a testing perspective, Christians totally ignore that most prayers fail and make excuses for it, not in God's plan. But then when some prayer coincidentally connects to something good, they blithely assume cause and effect. Even the pagans are better about tracking successes and failures with spells, instead of totally abdicating responsibility like the Christians. People in desperation reach for any twig of hope, and then ascribe far too much significance to helpful random events following some desperate prayer. Calling out for assistance from mythological beings is fine in desperation. Deciding your survival means they are real is not. This list is partial. There are many other blatantly broken aspects to both Christianity as observed and to the highly variable Bibles they use. Various other religions are better about being less convenient, being more responsible, rejecting worldly goods, following their tenets better, and on and on. While I have met some individual Christians whose belief I respect and take seriously, the current form of Christianity is a hypocritical, empty joke. Who needs that? I do not. I do not need fake explanations for the unexplained. I do not need someone else to assign meaning to my life. And most of all, I do not need the threat of damnation to lead an ethical life. The fact that some Christians think that is the only way to live right is contemptible. Now, in religion's defense, it could be proven true by some event or holy being coming to talk to us. However, it is nearly impossible to prove that something cannot exist, which means the atheists are actually exercising the greatest faith, since it is the least subject to ever actually being proven. Agnostic, the word, means cannot know, an annoyed reaction to the Gnostics, who said only we know. So those words are useless. We need a Greek word for I do not know yet, for the large number of us who are perfectly comfortable with the idea that we are going to find answers eventually, and do not mind not knowing, and even that some answers are not going to divulge themselves. It is fine, really. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.